My sister stood in front of 40 people in her new lakefront living room and told them our parents' duplex had been condemned for 3 years. I set my wine glass down on her marble counter and didn't say a word. I'm Dana Marsh. I'm 36. I'm a forensic financial analyst with the FBI's Chicago field office, and I spend my working life proving that numbers don't lie, even when the person reading them out loud does. 6 years ago, our parents left my sister Christine and me a 2-flat on Long Avenue, split 50-50 in the will, and for 6 years, she told the entire family the building was a money pit, drowning in code violations, costing her thousands she'd never see back. What she didn't know was that I'd pulled up the county's public tax portal on my lunch break 3 days earlier, out of nothing more than habit. Before I tell you what was sitting in that database, tell me, what time is it where you are right now, and where are you watching from? I always wonder how far a story like this travels. Welcome back to Karma's Keeper, where the quiet ones always turn out to be the ones keeping the records. If you've ever watched someone cry poor at every holiday dinner, while quietly living better than everyone at the table, this one is for you. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. But let me take you back 6 years, to the week after our father's funeral, when a 2-flat on the northwest side became the only thing left that still smelled like him. The block sits in a stretch of the northwest side, where the bungalows run close together, and everyone's front lawn is roughly the same 11 feet of concrete and grass, where the hardware store on the corner has been family-owned since before either of my parents were born, and where you could set your watch by the CTA bus that ran past our front window every 20 minutes. We weren't wealthy. My father worked 26 years as a machinist before his back finally gave out, and my mother kept the books for a dry cleaner 3 blocks over. The duplex wasn't an investment property to them, so much as a piece of insurance they never talked about directly. The first floor's rent quietly covered the property taxes and left a little left over, and that little left over was the difference between a tight month and a manageable one. I grew up on the second floor of that duplex. Our parents bought it in 1988, the kind of building where the radiators clank in December and the back porch leans 2 degrees to the left because nobody's ever bothered to fix it in 30 years. My father rented the first floor out to the same tenant family for almost 2 decades, and every month, on the first, he'd sit at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and write the rent down in blue ink. The date, the amount, a small check mark once it cleared. He never trusted a spreadsheet. He said paper couldn't crash on you at 3 in the morning. I used to sit across from him doing my geometry homework while he worked through that ritual, and somewhere in those evenings I absorbed the habit permanently. Write it down. Date it. Keep it somewhere you can find it again. Christine is 4 years older than me, and growing up she was the one who got sent to homecoming in a new dress, while I wore hers from the year before, taken in at the waist by our mother's own hands. Nobody meant it cruelly, not exactly. That's simply how the arithmetic worked in our house. There was enough for one daughter to shine and one daughter to manage the leftovers, and I turned out to be good at managing. By 14, I was reconciling my parents' checkbook against the bank statement every month, because my father's eyes had started to fail him, and he was too proud to admit it. By 17, I was the one who called the property tax office downtown when a bill for the duplex got misfiled and threatened to go to collections. Competence, in my family, was never rewarded with attention. It was quietly assigned to whoever demonstrated it first, and then expected forever, without a thank you attached. "You're so good with this stuff," my mother told me once, handing me a stack of unopened mail from the duplex's first-floor tenant. I was 19, home from my sophomore year of college for winter break. Christine gets so stressed about numbers. It gives her migraines. I remember taking that stack of envelopes and understanding, in some wordless 19-year-old way, that being good at something in this family meant you'd be doing it alone, indefinitely, while someone else got to be fragile about it in public. There's a scene I still think about from the summer I turned 22, home between semesters at the police academy prep program that eventually pointed me toward the bureau. Christine had graduated 3 years earlier and was living at home again, between jobs, and one night at dinner she announced she'd need a little help covering her car payment. My mother didn't hesitate. She turned to me. "Dana, you've got that internship stipend coming in, don't you?" I hadn't offered. I hadn't even been asked directly. It had simply been decided, the way weather gets decided, and I wrote a check for $400 before I'd finished my plate. My father watched the whole exchange and said nothing, which I understood even then to be its own kind of answer. When our father died, and our mother followed him 18 months later, the duplex passed to us jointly, no strings attached, split straight down the middle, in a will our mother had updated the year before she passed, specifically to make sure it was equal. Christine asked to be the one who managed the property day to day, since she lived 20 minutes from it, and I'd just started at Quantico for my forensic accounting certification. I agreed without much of a fight. I was grieving both parents inside of 2 years, and it felt, honestly, like a relief to hand something off. She started sending updates within the first 12 months. A busted water heater on the first floor, a citation for a cracked sidewalk slab that cost $400 to fix, a tenant who trashed the second-floor unit on the way out and left 3 months of unpaid rent behind. Every update ended the same way. "I'm basically eating this cost alone, Dana. I don't say anything because I don't want you to worry, but it's a lot." I sent her money twice over those years, without her explicitly asking a second time, because by then the pattern had trained me well enough that I didn't need to be asked. $4,000 the first year, $2,600 the second, because that is what you do when your sister tells you a building is bleeding her dry, and you're 3 states away at Quantico, with a service weapon and a caseload, and no time to independently verify a single word of it. There's another memory that surfaces every time I think about that period. My father, near the end, sitting in his recliner with the same yellow legal pad on his lap, going over the duplex numbers with me one final time because his hands had started shaking too much to write clearly himself. "Whatever happens," he said, not looking up from the page, "keep this pad going. Don't let anybody talk you out of writing it down." I didn't understand at the time that he might have been talking about more than rent. I understood it 18 months later, standing at Quantico's forensic accounting program orientation, filling out paperwork that asked me to list any relevant prior bookkeeping experience, and realizing the honest answer was a kitchen table on the second floor of that duplex, and a father who trusted paper more than people. Now, if you've ever been the sibling who got told the numbers didn't add up in your family's favor, and believed it, because you were too busy building your own life to double-check the person who shared your last name and your parents' will, drop a comment. Just one word. I want to know I'm not the only one who understands what it feels like to trust someone with your name still on the same deed. I didn't think much about the duplex after that, if I'm being honest. I want to be clear that I wasn't investigating my sister for years, quietly building a case the way people probably assume by now. I was building a career instead. 3 years on financial crimes out of the Chicago field office, then a transfer into the forensic asset tracing unit, the kind of work where you learn to read a stranger's entire hidden life through 18 months of bank statements they genuinely believed no one would ever request. I got good at it. Good enough that pulling a public property record had become as automatic to me as checking a mirror before changing lanes. Muscle memory from 400 prior cases that had nothing to do with my own family, until the week Christine sent the group text that started all of this. The text came on a Tuesday in March, 11 months before the party. "Big news. Todd and I closed on the Streeterville unit. Housewarming June 14th. Come celebrate with us." Attached was a photo of a glass tower on the lake, floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of view that costs more per month in property tax alone than most people's entire mortgage. My cousin Patrice texted me separately within the hour. "Did you know they were even looking at places like this? I thought the duplex was basically bankrupting her." I read that message twice, standing in my kitchen with a spoon halfway to my mouth. Something small and cold moved through my chest, the specific feeling I usually only get at my desk, 3 pages into a subject's financials, when a number stops matching the story attached to it. I called my colleague Marcus that week, not officially, just over burnt break-room coffee, and told him what I was starting to consider. "You know that's not remotely your jurisdiction," he said, half joking, stirring sugar into a cup that didn't need it. "Pull the county record on your own time if you want. Nobody's stopping you. Just, you sure you actually want to know? It's a fair question, and I sat with it longer than I let on. There's a version of this story where I let it go entirely, where I show up to the housewarming, admire the view, hug my sister at the door, and never once open that portal. Some part of me came close to choosing that version. I missed her. I missed having a sister who wasn't a set of unverified numbers sitting in the back of my mind. But I've spent 9 years of my career proving that the truth doesn't get any kinder the longer you postpone confirming it. And 3 days before the party, alone at my desk with a turkey sandwich I never finished, I typed the duplex's address into the county assessor's site. The first thing that loaded was the property record itself. 2 units, both currently occupied, 0 open code violations, and no citations filed against that address in the last 6 years, not one. I sat with that for a moment longer than I expected to. Then I requested the historical tax filings, something any member of the public can pull once they know the correct disclosure form, and found 6 consecutive years of Schedule E rental income reported against that same address, filed exclusively under Christine's name. $74,300, cumulative, across 6 tax years, both units, first floor and second, generating rent the entire time, never condemned, never vacant for longer than the standard turnover window between tenants. I cross-referenced the filing address against the second-floor tenant's own public voter registration, out of the same reflex I'd use on any case file, and confirmed a name I didn't recognize had been living there, paying rent, for the last 3 of those 6 years, a tenant Christine had never once mentioned existed. It's a small detail, almost administrative, but it was the one that finally moved the feeling in my chest from disbelief into something closer to certainty. You can misremember a repair estimate. You cannot misremember an entire second tenant. I want to be precise about what I did next, because I know people expect a scene where I confront her that same night, screaming into the phone. That's not what happened. I printed the tax transcripts, the property record, and 6 years of her own text messages asking me for money, and I put all of it into a manila folder, the same kind I use at work for an evidence packet, and I set that folder on my kitchen counter and looked at it for a long time before I did anything else. What I was about to do, I planned in the time it takes a printer to finish a 12-page job and go quiet again. I mentioned the whole situation to my therapist, Dr. Alvarez, at my regular Thursday session 2 days before the party, half expecting her to tell me to sit on it a while longer. She didn't. "You already know what the record says," she said, folding her hands over her notepad the way she does when she wants a sentence to land. "The question isn't whether you tell them. It's whether you can live with yourself if you sit in that room and let her say it to 40 people's faces and say nothing." I told her I was worried about the timing, about doing it at a party instead of privately, about looking cruel instead of accurate. "There's nothing cruel about reading a public document out loud," she said. "Cruelty would have been letting this go another 6 years." I left that session with the folder already printed and sitting on my passenger seat, like some part of me had made the decision before I'd consciously agreed to it. If I'm honest about why I went to that party at all, instead of simply skipping it and mailing the truth to her in a certified letter, it's this. Some small, stubborn part of me was still hoping I'd misread the transcripts, that the discrepancy would turn out to be a filing error, a joint return I didn't know about, some boring administrative explanation that would let me hug my sister at the door and mean it. I wanted to be wrong. I have built an entire career on the belief that wanting to be wrong doesn't excuse you from checking, and I wasn't going to make an exception for my own sister just because the alternative hurt more. Would you have called her that same night and confronted her over the phone? Or would you have waited to do it in person, the way I ultimately chose to? If a story like this pulls something in you, stay with me and subscribe, because you're going to want to see exactly how this lands. The housewarming was on the 38th floor, a corner unit with a wraparound view of the lake, string lights looped across the balcony railing, a caterer weaving through the crowd with trays of something finished in truffle oil. 40 people, easily, spilling between the kitchen island and the wall of glass behind it. Christine stood at the center of all of it in a green dress, glowing under the recessed lighting, telling a cluster of our aunts about the nightmare of the duplex. "The fines alone, you have no idea," she was saying. one hand pressed lightly to her chest for emphasis. It's basically condemned at this point. I've just been quietly eating the loss so nobody else has to deal with it. Our Aunt Barb patted her forearm. You're a saint, she said. Some of us just can't say no to family the way you can't. I stood near the kitchen with my folder tucked into a tote bag over my shoulder, watching my sister accept warm, unearned sympathy for a lie built on top of a building I legally co-own, funding a condo that lie had quietly helped finance. I noticed the caterer, a young guy named Emil, refilling glasses along the counter, and when he reached mine he paused half a second longer than the pour required, like he'd caught something in my expression he wasn't sure how to place. He didn't say anything that first time. He just gave a small, single nod and moved on down the counter. I've thought about that nod more than I probably should have in the months since. Every few minutes another relative found a way to work the same theme into casual conversation, as if it had been passed around the room ahead of time like an agenda item. My Uncle Ray told me, unprompted, that he admired how Christine never complained, even carrying that duplex debt alone. A second cousin I hadn't spoken to in years asked if I ever felt guilty letting her handle all that stress by herself, while you're off doing your federal thing. I answered each of them the same flat, non-committal way, filing the comment away the way I file every operational detail on a case. Not reacting yet, just cataloging who had said what, and how confidently they'd said it. Todd's mother cornered me near the balcony door for a few minutes, telling me how proud she was of how far Christine has come, especially carrying that duplex burden practically alone all these years. I said nothing that could be repeated later as an accusation, just a small non-committal sound, and excused myself toward the kitchen island. Every conversation in that room seemed to circle back to the same performance, different relatives reciting the same script my sister had apparently been rehearsing for 6 years, each one convinced they were offering her something original. I still don't know exactly when Christine decided the duplex would become her cover story, instead of just a hardship she exaggerated a little at Thanksgiving. I don't know if it started small, one slightly inflated repair estimate that worked better than she expected, and simply grew from there year over year, or if she sat down at some point and did deliberate math on what 6 quiet years of undisclosed rent could eventually buy her. I've turned that question over more times than I'd like to admit out loud, and I've never landed anywhere I fully trust. Around 8:30, I stepped out onto the balcony for air, and found myself standing just around the corner from where Christine and Todd had drifted, half hidden by a potted olive tree, thinking they were alone. Did you tell your aunt about the duplex fines again? Todd asked her, low, amused, refilling his own glass from a bottle he'd carried outside. That thing gets more expensive every time you tell it. Christine laughed, a short private laugh I recognized from childhood, the one she used when she thought no one outside the joke could hear her. It works, she said. Nobody's ever going to check a county website at a party, babe. Relax. I stood very still against the cold glass of the railing, close enough to hear every word, and I understood in that moment that this wasn't a story she'd started believing herself over time. She knew exactly what it was. She'd simply never once considered that the person most likely to check a county website for a living might be standing 40 feet away from her at her own housewarming party. I went back inside before either of them turned around, and I didn't say anything to anyone for the next 20 minutes. Not because I was still deciding what to do, but because I already knew, and I wanted to choose the moment instead of letting the moment choose me. Around 9, Christine raised her glass and made the kind of toast people make after 2 drinks, when they want the whole room as an audience. To Todd, for believing in us even when I was drowning trying to manage that money pit duplex our parents left me practically alone, she said, and the room laughed warmly, and someone near the balcony called out, to Christine, the family saint, and I felt something in me go very still. The exact stillness I feel at my desk, when a spreadsheet finally resolves into a pattern I can no longer unsee. I wasn't angry yet, not exactly, not surprised, just confirming, in real time, what the tax transcripts had already told me 3 days earlier, in far less flattering language. I didn't wait for her to finish making her way around the room with her glass raised. I walked to the center of the living room, set my tote bag down on the ottoman, and pulled out the manila folder. The room didn't go quiet all at once. It went quiet in a wave, starting with the people standing closest to me, and spreading outward the way a rumor moves through a crowd before anyone said a word aloud. Christine's smile held for exactly one more second after she registered the folder in my hands. Then it didn't. "I want to read something," I said. My voice didn't shake. I hadn't rehearsed a single line of what came next, but 9 years of testifying in front of grand juries had trained a register into me that doesn't shake even when some part of me privately wants it to. Schedule E, filed with the IRS, 6 consecutive years, under Christine Marsh Bellamy, reporting rental income from the property on Long Avenue. I read the years out loud, one at a time, the exact filed figure attached to each. 12,100 the first year, rising steadily, settling around 13,000 most years after that. Total reported across 6 years, $74,300. Nobody in that room moved. Somewhere behind me, a glass touched down on a countertop very carefully, like whoever was holding it no longer trusted their own hand. You don't understand the context," Christine said, and every trace of toast circuit warmth had drained out of her voice, replaced by something thin and fast. "There were expenses. There were repairs. You weren't there, Dana. You have no idea what it actually took to manage that place while you were off at Quantico. I checked the county record too," I said. 0 citations filed against that address in 6 years. No condemnation notice. Not once. Ever. I kept my hands folded loosely in front of me. I didn't raise the folder like a weapon or wave it for effect. I just held it, level, the way you hold a file you're about to close for good. Todd stepped in beside her, his face doing the thing people's faces do when they're defending something they're only now realizing they never independently verified. "Dana, come on. This doesn't need to happen here, at our own party." He stopped mid-sentence. Something in his own words must have landed wrong in his own ear, because he glanced sideways at Christine, and for the first time all night I watched him actually look at her, instead of at the skyline glowing behind her shoulder. My Aunt Barb, the same woman who'd called her a saint less than 20 minutes earlier, stared at Christine with an expression I'd genuinely never seen on her face before. Not anger yet. Recalculation. If you've ever sat in a room where 40 people went quiet all at once, and the silence itself became the confession nobody in that room was willing to say out loud, share this with someone who needs to hear it. You'll want to hear what happened next. Christine tried 3 separate times to recover the room after that, and I watched each attempt fail in real time. She tried tears first, one hand pressed flat against her collarbone, saying I'd always resented her, always looked for a reason to tear her down in front of people who mattered to her. When that failed to move a single person, she tried anger instead, saying I had no right to dig through her private finances, that public tax records were somehow an invasion, that I'd used my badge to spy on her. I told her, level and even, that public property filings aren't private by definition, and that I hadn't touched a single document that wasn't already accessible to any stranger with a laptop and 20 spare minutes. When even that failed, she looked around the room searching for allies, the way she always had, expecting the room to rally the way it always rallied around her, and found 40 people quietly studying the contents of their own drinks instead. "I paid your down payment on this condo with money you told me a building was losing," I said. It was the only direct accusation I made all night, and I made it exactly once, into a silence that had already done most of the work for me before I opened my mouth. "You didn't have to lie to me, Christine. You could have simply told me you needed to keep the rent for yourself. I would have said yes. You lied because you wanted both, the money and the sympathy that came with pretending you didn't have it." Christine's mother-in-law tried once more, stepping forward with the practiced smoothness of someone used to smoothing things over at dinner parties. "I'm sure there's an explanation," she said, glancing between us like she was refereeing a tennis match she hadn't agreed to officiate. "Families are complicated. Let's not do this here." I didn't raise my voice to answer her. "The explanation is in the folder," I said. "It's 6 pages. I'm happy to leave copies." Nobody took me up on the offer. But nobody defended Christine again either, and that silence told me more than an apology would have. Christine tried one final approach, quieter than the others, almost pleading. I was going to tell you eventually, she said. I just didn't know how. I let that sentence sit in the room for a second, before I answered it. You had 6 years, I said. You had a group chat, a phone number, and a shared deed. There isn't a version of, eventually, that gets you here by accident. She didn't have anything left to say to that. Nobody in the room did. Nobody clapped, nobody cheered. There was no version of that room erupting into some satisfying ovation on my behalf, and honestly, I didn't want one. I set the folder down flat on the ottoman, picked my tote bag back up off the floor, and walked to the elevator alone, past Emil the caterer, who this time gave me a longer, steadier look and said, quiet enough that only I could hear it over the murmur behind us, "Good luck out there." I still don't know if he meant with my sister specifically, or with whatever came after her. Probably both. The drive home took 40 minutes on the Kennedy at that hour, and I didn't turn the radio on once. I got back to my apartment, made a cup of chamomile tea I didn't especially want, and sat down at my own kitchen table. Not a duplex kitchen table, a table I'd bought myself, in a life I'd built entirely without anyone's financial help, and pulled out a fresh legal pad, blue ink, the exact way my father used to work. I wrote the date at the top of the page. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel avenged. I felt like someone who had finally been allowed to close a file that had been sitting open on her desk, untouched, for 6 straight years. The consequences unfolded slowly after that, the way they usually do once the initial confrontation ends, and the paperwork quietly takes over instead. Christine and I retained separate attorneys within the month, and a court-ordered accounting of the duplex's rental income eventually confirmed, in far more boring language than my folder had, everything the tax filings had already shown, plus interest owed on my share going back 6 years. Todd moved out of the Streeterville unit that September, quietly, no announcement to the extended family, though Patrice mentioned it to me over coffee like gossip instead of what it actually was. The natural conclusion to a foundation built partly on someone else's undisclosed rent. Christine still holds the condo for now, though I've heard secondhand she's taken on a second stream of income to cover the mortgage, without the 6 years of hidden cushion she used to quietly rely on. The duplex itself is under joint management now, court-ordered, with a third-party property manager filing quarterly statements to both of us directly. No exceptions, no verbal updates over the phone that I'm simply expected to trust. It's a strange kind of relief, seeing a number on a page instead of hearing it delivered as a performance. My Aunt Barb sent a card that fall, no explanation, just a short handwritten note that said she'd been thinking about our family's habit of rewarding the loudest version of a hardship instead of the quietest one, and that she was sorry it took her this long to notice which of us had spent 6 years being which. Our cousin Patrice turned out to be the one honest thing that came out of the entire evening. She texted me 2 weeks after the party. No lecture attached, nothing performative, just, I should have asked more questions years ago. I'm genuinely sorry I didn't. I told her she didn't owe me more than that sentence, and I meant it. I still don't know if Christine ever told Todd the full extent of what those 6 years of quiet rent actually funded, dollar for dollar, or whether he's chosen not to ask. I've thought about that more than once, and I probably always will. If this story reached something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you've ever realized that the sympathy you were giving someone wasn't earned at all, it was a payment plan for their comfort you didn't know you were financing every single month, tell me. I read every one of your comments. I ran into Emil the caterer completely by accident, about 2 months later, at a coffee shop near my office, Tool in his catering polo from an earlier event. He recognized me before I recognized him. "You're the folder," he said, half smiling, like it was the nicest thing he could think to call someone. I think about that party sometimes. Best tip I never got, honestly, because I forgot to leave before things got interesting. We laughed about it for a minute, and he told me he'd since quit that catering company for something steadier, and I told him I hoped it worked out. It's a small, unremarkable detail in the larger story, but it stayed with me. The reminder that a room full of people who say nothing isn't the same as a room full of people who saw nothing. I offered Christine one thing once everything finally settled: a referral to a financial counselor I genuinely trust. Someone who could help her manage what's left of the duplex honestly, going forward, jointly, with real disclosed numbers instead of a performance for the extended family. She hasn't taken me up on it yet. I'm not holding my breath, and I'm no longer the family's ATM either way. That particular arrangement isn't up for renegotiation, this time or any other. I still love my sister. That's the part of this I never know how to say cleanly in a story like this, where the ending is supposed to feel like closure. I don't hate her, and I don't wish the condo away from her, and I don't spend my evenings replaying the housewarming for satisfaction the way I might have expected to. Mostly I just think about the version of her that existed before the duplex became a cover story. The sister who used to sit next to me at that same kitchen table, doing her own homework, while our father worked through the rent ledger, before either of us understood that the numbers in that house would eventually mean something so different for each of us. I don't know if that version of her is recoverable. I've decided I don't need an answer to that tonight. Here's what 6 years with a yellow legal pad taught me. In the end, the same lesson my father was writing down in blue ink at that kitchen table, before I was even old enough to understand what he meant by it. The numbers don't perform for anyone. They don't cry at parties. They don't need your sympathy, and they don't ask for it either. They simply sit there, patient, waiting for someone willing to actually pull the file. That's my story. I still keep a legal pad on my own kitchen counter today, next to my own mail this time, dated the exact same way my father dated his. And now, if you're watching this, I want to ask you something. If you'd found 6 years of quiet, documented proof sitting in a public record with your own name attached to the deed, would you have confronted her in front of everyone the way I did? Or would you have taken her aside privately first, away from the room? If this story stayed with you, drop a comment. Tell me one word. Filed. Because that's what I want every person watching this to understand. You don't answer 6 years of a lie with anger. You answer it with a folder, a date, and a room that finally, on its own, goes quiet. This story is fictional, created for dramatic entertainment, education, and reflection. But the lesson underneath it is real. The people who tell you they're drowning are sometimes the same people who learned, a long time ago, that your guilt made a far better investment than their own honesty ever would.